Thank you, Rob. All right, just found out that the chair, Mr. Millen, is not available today. So my apologies. He'll put up with me. Okay, no debate on that. We're good. Let's move on. That's your last chance. Okay, we've got the call to order. Is there any declaration of interest from any of the members of the committee? Seeing none, can be declared. We don't have any delegations. Items for direction and discussion. Mr. Hoy, this is budget and finance, but it looks like a transportation meeting today. Pat, you're on.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to give a quick introduction here, and then my staff is kind of going to go into more detail. So this is about the Transportation Services 10-year capital plan. It's a strategic financial document that outlines the county's short and long-term investments in roads, bridges, storm sewers, facilities, and equipment. The plan serves as a roadmap to ensure sustainable development and maintenance of public assets while aligning with community priorities and available resources. So the preparation of the capital plan is a collaborative process among transportation staff in both operations and engineering, staff from finance, member municipalities, the Budget and Finance Committee, of course, now, and ultimately County Council. So Sean Anthony, our operations manager, Trevor Ireton, the engineering manager, are going to review the capital budget process and how capital expenditures are determined and prioritized based on criteria such as asset condition ratings and assessments, service demands, regulatory requirements, previously adopted plans like an asset management plan or a fleet management plan, and strategic goals. This long-term approach helps the county manage growth, maintain critical infrastructure, ensure public safety, transparency, and accountability in the use of public funds. So I guess first I'll hand off to Sean Anthony, our operations manager, who's going to go over the capital with the operations department.
Okay, thanks, Pat, and committee for the opportunity to provide an update from the operations division. As the first presenter in this series on capital purchasing, I expect my colleagues will be thanking me for easing the standards a bit, but nevertheless, the next dozen or so slides will attempt to convey the decision-making criteria for capital asset purchases within the operations division of the Transportation Services Department. So for some scope here, the operations division is composed of 43 full-time operators, 4 mechanics, 22 seasonals, 2 shop supervisors, 4 area supervisors, and 9 management and admin staff, as well as 22 seasonals. These folks are responsible for highway maintenance, including but not limited to winter maintenance, signs, guide rails, culverts, mowing, brushing, etc. So they work out of 4 main depots and 1 satellite depot, and make use of several storage buildings as well. To enable them to accomplish their various tasks, the county owns 23 tandem plows, 3 pickup trucks, 3 graders, 1 excavator, 4 tractors, 4 payloaders, 4 backhoes, 2 skid steers, 2 chippers, and 2 forklifts. So focusing first on machinery, equipment, and fleet, the county uses a weighted point system outlined in the fleet manual, which has been provided to the committee as background. Points are assigned to various categories, including age, mileage, function, reliability, vehicle history and repairs, and the overall condition. The more points that are assigned to a piece of equipment, the closer it is to replacement. So generally, this works out to 7 years for our half-ton pickups, 10 years for our 3/4 ton pickups, 12 years for our 1-ton pickups, tandem plows, tractors and backhoes, and 17 years for our excavators and graders. So to supplement the fleet manual and to help answer some lingering questions that we had, in 2022, the county retained Fleet Challenge, which has subsequently been acquired by Deloitte. to challenge the county to achieve an optimized and right-sized fleet, enhanced operational efficiency and service excellence, improved fleet asset management, and reduce greenhouse gas and air pollutant emissions. So to do so, Fleet Challenge used their proprietary software called Fleet Analytics Review, or FAR, which they describe as a tool that uses historical operating data for predictive analysis and forecasting, making fleet review processes and the path to net zero thorough and efficient. So data from Grey County was inputted into the lifecycle assessment software tool called Fleet Analytics Review, or FAR, as I just described, which allows for methodical, well-informed business decisions. Fleet Challenge modeled a 15-year budget cycle for 3 scenarios, including A, business as usual, B, optimized economic life cycles, and C, balanced capital expenditures and optimized life cycles. So it's difficult to distill a 276-page report into 2 slides, but the main recommendations from a capital purchasing perspective would be to increase our pickup ownerships by 2 years and tandem snowplows by 1 year, place greater emphasis on preventative versus reactive maintenance, which would in turn allow us to reach those ownership cycles of 9 and 13 years respectively. As well, their modeling showed that purchasing would provide the lowest total cost overall. Their modeling showed that purchasing the vehicles would provide the lowest total cost of ownership over a 12-year life cycle, and that renting may be a cost-effective option for vehicles with higher than average annual kilometers traveled, such as our patrol trucks, which go out, especially in the wintertime, on all 3 shifts and all 4 patrols, and they're traveling, hundreds of kilometers in a given shift. So when we purchase a new vehicle or piece of equipment, it's paid for by a transfer from reserve and from the sale of equipment. To allow us to continually top up that reserve, we charge vehicle usage to various budgets when we do our timesheets, for example. So if I spent 6.5 hours in vehicle 02220 on today, say, I would put down 8 hours worked on my timesheet and add 6.5 hours of vehicle use to 02220. In turn, we have charge out rates for the various pieces of equipment, so for half tons, for excavators, and so on. And that allows us to basically ensure that we're consistently funding the replacement of assets as we use them. So for reference, the budgeted transfer from reserve was 1.179 million in 2025. However, the budgeted purchases are 2.9 million. And this is because of delays in receiving previously ordered equipment, which has been carried over to the current year. So if all purchases for 2025 are delivered by the end of the year, the projected ending balance of the equipment reserve is 361,800, which would then be topped up again in Q1 of 2026 to fund the 2026 purchases. So it's also worth noting that the budgeted replacement cost for various pieces of equipment is calculated based on the most recent purchase of a comparable piece of equipment, plus 2% per year inflationary factor. Which brings us to funding risks and implications. So one of the primary pieces of advice from the Fleet Challenge report that seemed to miss the mark for me was the suggestion to issue a pause on replacements of conventional internal combustion engine trucks until EV equivalents were available. So considering the year of that report, 2022, I feel fortunate that we stayed the course with our asset management strategy, replacing trucks as needed, due to the fact that the number of EV pickups that the authors expected to be available by 2025 really hasn't materialized. So notwithstanding the obvious environmental benefits from an emissions standpoint, we must still do our due diligence by first testing the vehicles in a small sample size to ensure that they have the range and function to meet the demands within our fleet. So this is why we've committed to replacing 50% of new half tons with EV counterparts, which equates to roughly 1.5 vehicles per year, or 6.8% of our overall number of half tons. And a final note on EVs is that predicting a 10-year capital plan while much of the EV heavy equipment industry is still in R&D is a challenge. And as such, the best we can do at current is basically apply a best guess inflationary adjustment factor of around 20 to 25%. So moving to that second bullet there, as we can all appreciate, tariffs and inflation will continue to pose budgetary risks for the foreseeable future. There's not much we can do to control that, but we can plan for it by adjusting our predictive inflationary factors. And the cost of insurance for vehicles in production, such as tandem snowplows, are being passed on to the consumer at a rate of about 2%. So add that to the risks associated with real inflation. So all of these things give us as staff a lot to think about and pose a major challenge. I realize a bit hard to read on the screen there, but it's just as a screen grab of our capital forms database, essentially. Unfortunately, finance and IT staff have developed this capital forms database, which allows us as managers to visualize and plan our 10-year capital budgets, as well as ensure we are ordering equipment when we're supposed to be ordering equipment. Furthermore, it allows us to flatten the budget curve and avoid large spikes in future years. So looking now at our facilities, historically, the county has retained a consultant to perform building condition assessments, or BCAs. And the goal of the BCAs is to determine the physical condition of the facilities with respect to the structural and architectural components, mechanical and electrical systems, fire and life safety systems, and predictive 30-year renewal costs. Furthermore, to determine the scope, timing, and current costs of all building component repairs, and to determine the finances that are required to be set aside for both normal maintenance and capital repair and replacement for major components for budgetary purposes. It should be noted that the consultant that we used in the last round of BCAs is not a subject expert on domes. So we have supplemented the Walter Fedde report with specific dome inspections every 3 to 4 years. So the BCAs guide our decision-making and 10-year plan, and capital expenditures are paid for by a reserve, which is funded from the levy portion of the facility's capital budget. For reference, the transfer to reserve to fund operations facilities activities is $386,000 in 2025. However, the budgeted purchases is significantly higher at $10.4 million due to the fact that it's anticipated that the new Patrol D Ceylon Depot project will begin this year, with the land having been secured just 2 weeks ago. So in other words, funding has been pushed into reserve since about 2018 or 2019 to allow us to pay for the development of a new depot once the lands were secured, and that reserve will now be drawn down. So keeping in mind that the Patrol D project will likely span into 2026, the projected ending balance of the domes and depots reserve for 2025 is $677,000. And to provide a visual representation of the locations of the various facilities, which operations owns and operates or has a business interest in. Here's a map. The county spans 4,498 square kilometers and takes the average driver about an hour and 20 minutes to traverse from Wyerton to Dundalk or Clifford to Thornbury. As such, we operate 4 main depots in Chatsworth, Clarksburg, Eaton, and Flesherton, with the latter being leased, at least for another year from MTO. As previously mentioned, having secured a 40-acre parcel of land, we are in the midst of preparations to build a new 8,000 square foot depot at the junction of Grey Road 4 and Grey Road 14. And last but not least, in consideration of the triple bottom line, that's people, planet, and prosperity, as a guiding approach to the growth of the county, Grey County has a 40% reductions target by 2030 and to be net zero by 2045. Put simply, this means that staff must consider low emissions, energy efficient options wherever they exist. And in many cases, this does mean paying a premium for certain products, such as EVs, garage doors, and heating systems. And further, it also requires all new county buildings to be net zero or net zero performance ready. So performance ready is an industry lingo for a building that is designed to be highly energy efficient, similar to a net zero building, but it doesn't necessarily have the renewable energy systems already installed, like solar panels. It's designed to be ready to easily accommodate those systems later, potentially when the owner is ready to invest. So essentially, it's wired for future renewable energy. So that's all to say that there's a financial commitment to greening and gray, and that just because there's a cheaper option, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best option long term, which I know is not lost on anybody here. So with that, I would like to thank you for listening. And as you can see, there's lots of moving parts that go into the operations capital budget. However, I feel we have a methodical approach that allows us to make defensible decisions with the flexibility to avoid getting into jams, and most importantly, make efficient use of taxpayer dollars for the good of everyone in Grey County. So I'll turn it back to the deputy chair for questions or now or later. Thanks.
There you go. Thank you. Any questions? Take them while they're fresh in everybody's mind. Mr. Mackey. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thanks for your presentation. It will be a tough act to follow for those that are preceding you. Sean, you mentioned that there will be a cost to meet the 40% greenhouse emissions for the county. Are you able to project out what that cost will be for the roads department? No, sorry.
So in terms of a 10-year budget, I don't know that I would be qualified to provide an estimate on the overall budget impact. I would just say that it's embedded into the decision-making for everything. And in general, I would say that when you're looking at something like a garage door, for example, generally we're applying a 20 to 25% inflationary factor to ensure that we have enough money in the budget to select options that are in line with our emissions reductions targets. So kind of not a great answer in terms of overall costs, but perhaps somebody can answer.
Thanks for that, Sean. Further to that, I think we want to try and do this in just a smart, methodical way, logical way, in terms of when something is coming up for replacement, that's the time to look at what alternative systems are out there. Are they more energy efficient? What will that look like in terms of energy savings going forward as well? We definitely don't want to get into a situation where we're replacing stuff if they're not at end of life. So that's something that we want to try to make sure that when we're looking at our capital budgets, if something is coming up for replacement or renewal, we're looking for those opportunities to see if there's alternative systems out there. As Sean indicated, in some cases we see an increase to be able to go to something that's a bit more energy efficient. But we try to balance that in terms of what we might anticipate and see on the back end from an energy cost savings perspective as well. So it depends on what we're replacing. Obviously, from a fleet perspective, that's what Sean indicated, that we want to do that again in a smart, interim, logical way, where we're replacing some of our vehicles initially, making sure that it's going to work from an operations perspective. But then we can also start tracking and monitoring what we might be able to save in terms of operating costs or mechanical costs, because what we're hearing is that there's less parts outside of the battery, obviously, that's in these systems or the batteries. We think that there could be potentially some savings as well, based on some research and other things that we're seeing. So although there may be an initial upfront cost for that, over time, it could either balance out, or we might see some cost savings. Fleet, for example, we should start seeing immediately some savings on the fuel side, right? So things like that, where we need to factor in not just the initial capital costs, what's that long-term cost savings that we anticipate? And like I said, we want to just do that in a logical pace that makes sense for us, a balanced approach across the corporation.
Anybody else? Shirley. Councilman Keavy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Sean, for your presentation. And perhaps the question is for CAO Scherzer, but I'm just wondering if there's any update, Randy, on grants for chargers and where we're sitting with that.
Yeah, thanks for that question and thanks for that update. We hope to be able to provide some notice on that very soon. Yeah, so I'd say stay tuned on that. We did put forward a grant application. Yeah, so we're hoping to be able to provide an update to council on where that currently stands. So there's not just on our to support our fleet chargers is what we put forward as a grant application, but also just our community chargers as well. So yeah, so both will be providing updates in the very near future for sure.
Thank you very much, Chair. A question, I have two questions. One, just confirmation that the life cycle change of the 7 years for the half ton, it is the implementation of the 2-year extra that was suggested in the fleet management. And then two, it's been a couple of years and I'm wondering if there's been any data collected on correlation between the keeping of the extra 2 years and the sale value of the vehicle when we're done. If the sale value is deteriorated more than the value of keeping it for that extra couple of years. Just wondering if there's a comment on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the second bullet point there about increasing our preventative maintenance versus reactive maintenance will really be the key in allowing us to hold on to those vehicles for the extra 2 years. At current, around 7 years, our half-ton pickup trucks are getting into the range of 350 to 400,000 kilometers on them. So they're starting that quick downhill trajectory at that point. It's been a struggle the past couple of years, more with personnel in the mechanic shop, and we will be bringing forward a business case in that regard in the near future. So that's been part of it. And it's just having people in the shop that could allow us to do more preventative maintenance versus reactive maintenance, and hence in turn increase those life cycles from 7 to 9 years for our half-ton pickups. I think that's a hurdle that we'll cross in the next couple of years here. But it's kind of first things first. So I guess that kind of answers your second question, is that we really haven't had the opportunity to collect the data on how that's funneling into the overall return on investment when those vehicles go to sale on gov deals. Generally, we are getting fairly good prices for the vehicles that we do put on gov deals. People recognize them as well-maintained county vehicles, and we do get a fairly reasonable return when we put them on the market. But it's going to take some time and a little bit of bolstering of our mechanic staff before we can get to that additional preventative maintenance that will allow us to keep the vehicles for 2 more years.
Sorry, thank you, Sean. Just for a quick follow-up then. So the 7-year life cycle is our current system. The plan suggested 2 more, so we're looking at going to 9 years. Just making sure I fully understood that, because that's surprising. I would have thought we were at 5, we hit 7 following the plan, but we're correct. Thank you very much.
My question here is, I guess, if we do move forward officially on urban roads download, that's about 35 kilometers, I think, of urban roads that are serviced by the county right now outside of Owen Sound, which I think is different than Owen Sound, where you rely upon Owen Sound staff in an agreement for that service provision. But that reduction in responsibility for the county should show itself to some extent in some of these charts. I know in Owen Sound we've just redone our replacement strategy from 12 to 10 years on tandems. I would argue against anyone that our topography is really hard on tandem trucks in the winter. Certainly we've got a lot of open miles and they put lots of miles on in the county, but certainly I hope that we can achieve some benefit there by extending out the pickup trucks and the tandems. And I guess probably, I mean, it should show itself somewhere, somehow. If we're going to relinquish some of that responsibility to lower tiers, we're going to realize it somewhere. We have to make a commitment to being able to demonstrate it somehow. So I'm just wondering, I guess, to what extent have you integrated that consideration into these numbers?
Yeah, to me, it's a logical question to ask. Like you're giving up a certain amount of kilometers, X amount of responsibility. Roughly that equates to 4 to 5%, I believe, of our overall road network. Now, in terms of operations staff, at roughly 50, you're talking, 1, 2, maybe 3 staff. But in terms of staffing levels that represents, in terms of overall responsibility, in terms of fleet, however, most of the conversations that we've had with the member municipalities has resulted in conversations around assistance agreements for especially for winter maintenance. So in terms of an overall reduction of our service levels, we're at this stage, at least, we're expecting to maintain those extra kilometers at least for winter maintenance. So reduction in the total number of snowplows to me is unlikely. Currently, we have 23 that are servicing 19 routes. So we do have 4 spares, as we call them, but they're not technically spares. They're always running because there's always something that's on a hoist in the shop and it's being repaired or maintained. So we have, to me, just the right amount of snowplows currently to maintain the 19 routes that we have that are roughly 90 to 100 kilometers and take maximum or minimally 2.5 to 3 hours to service, which is kind of at the upper echelon of where you want your maintenance levels to be. In terms of the half tons, I could see potentially there being a reduction in some of the summer maintenance as we're not getting into the urbans. And potentially there may be in the summers, especially when we need the half tons, we don't need them as much in the winter. So potentially there might be some savings there. But I think it's still early in the process to know exactly for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A bit of a 2-part question, if I may. The first part for you, Sean, and the second probably for Randy. I'm curious to know, post-COVID, are wait times decreasing now to get, snowplows and graders and vehicles of that nature? Are they more readily available? And for you, Randy, are we at the county looking at our procurement policy? And I don't know whether these are made in Canada or whether they're coming from the US. Are we looking at trying to purchase Canadian where we can?
So yeah, I can confirm that the wait times are coming down in terms. So I'll start with the heavy equipment, the snow plows. Certainly, the wait times are coming down, but there still is a wait time. We would recommend that we continue doing an award before budget approval, as we've done again this year, and we'll be bringing a report with the results of that most recent tender for the 2026 snow plows very soon. Just to ensure that all our bases are covered. But talking to our senior fleet supervisor, he has noted that it's come down from, I would estimate, roughly 16 months to closer to the 11 months kind of trajectory for snowplows. And then in terms of light duty pickups, for example, half-ton gas half-ton trucks, we're looking at about 2 to 3 months. So we just ordered them about a month ago, and we're predicting probably around July or August to receive those trucks. And then for EVs, it's actually even more readily available for the models that are out there. There's still a limited selection in terms of what you can get. But for the Ford Lightning, for example, I'm hearing between a month and 2 months in terms of delivery times.
And as part of the second part of that question, so I know we've been keep monitoring like what other municipalities are looking at doing in terms of from a procurement perspective. There are opportunities where we can expand some of our current I can't remember the exact terminology. I might look to Mary Lou for this piece in terms of our the amount we can procure. And looking for opportunities that way in terms of the value that we put on some of that. So I know we're looking at in specific projects, like for example, Rockwood, where we're looking at through the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, being able to look at opportunities to source as much Canadian product as we can to, again, where it makes sense and where we're able to maybe avoid some of the potential impacts on that we're starting to see with respect to tariffs. But it is something that we're closely monitoring and seeing what others are doing in terms of how we can approach this. You have to balance with making sure that it's obviously we want to support Canadians, support as much local product as we can, but also making sure that we're looking at what makes still the most sense in terms of the value and what costs as it relates to taxpayers' dollars. So we're trying to look at it from a balance viewpoint and look for opportunities where it's possible to amend some of our procurement with respect to that.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Sean, you mentioned that the Ford Lightnings are it's easy to get Ford Lightnings. Have you done any research as to why that is? Does the buying public know something that maybe we should be looking at?
So I would just say not extensive research, but we have done some due diligence in speaking with some of our counterparts at neighboring municipalities and counties, for example. So we did have a meeting within the past few months with the operations section at Dufferin County. We had lots of questions for them. How do they perform as a patrol truck? How do they perform as a work truck? And so on and so forth. In terms of a patrol truck, noting that they do have a smaller geography than us. They said no issues and that sort of thing. But again, I think at the end of the day, we need to do some of our own research as well, get some chargers in-house and see how they perform on a very cautious sort of conservative approach. And see if there's they perform better as a patrol truck versus a work truck, and that maybe there's a certain spec that we fill, and instead of cycling trucks around as patrol trucks and then eventually becoming a work truck, maybe that is just a supervisor truck or a patrol truck, for example. So still lots of research to be done, I would say. But
anyone else? You noted the consulting company and whatnot. Did we get good value out of that?
so I don't know the actual cost on that. That was before my time, but in terms of the insights from the report, it was good value in terms of the takeaway and the suggestions that came from the report. But I couldn't speak to the financial impact that was at that time, 2022.
There was just a few things in that report in that, as going through it. I'll share my opinion of consultants is not high. I'll say that. There was a couple of things that just caught me. They only used the 2016 census. So we're at 93,000 people or whatever, but we're well over 110,000. I guess some of the data that's in there coming out, is it applicable for today? And still using that. The other one was, they had the 4 depots in there. Durham was in as a depot. Ayton was opened in 2010. So it just gives me a little bit of caution. What were these guys looking at? They have I guess a fancy computerization formula or that they put in, but there was some stuff in there that I just went, yeah. I'm not sure why we hired them, Randy, what we were getting out of it. And to one point that you just made, Sean, was we're seeing really, really good gov deals on our pickup trucks. People are purchasing them. And the one thing that you highlighted in here was, well, we need to be more proactive and not as reactive on our maintenance on our trucks. Well, if somebody's buying them, it doesn't take too long for the word to get out there that, you know, our trucks, you don't want to buy one of those county trucks there. But on gov deals, everybody's still buying them. So I'm thinking that we're doing a really good job already as far as proactive to reactive. So out of the whole thing, yeah, I just wondering what we got out of that. Maybe I'm looking more towards Pat if he has more better answer for that than putting you on the spot, Sean. I'd rather put him on the spot. That's a lot easier.
Yeah, I don't disagree with your sentiments there. I would say that we had a heck of a time finding someone to even do that report. I remember at the time. You know, it was all kind of the data gathering was kind of during COVID, and it was kind of a funny time. And so yeah, I mean, I guess it opened our eyes on a lot of things that we need to look at a little more, and kind of things we've been looking at since. But yeah, for how many pages it was, I could have dealt with half the pages with twice the valuable data for sure. But yeah.
I just maybe add that, I agree, that they can use what we give them, and, you know, they can only do so much with that information. Not necessarily a tailored report for Grey County per se. There could, maybe you could get a better report in terms of that. But the best management practices were really kind of where I focused in on. That would be more applicable to a comparable size and fleet and municipal setting. So again, not sure what we paid for the report, but still some good information in there.
I guess it's our information. They just did some interpretation on it. As you said, we gave them all the information. Then they regurgitated it back to us. There's some smart guys there. Yeah. We'll get into that later. That's something on down the road. The other thing was we spoke, and you spoke about it, Randy, and I was just wondering, when you get into our structures and buildings and whatnot, and you keep talking about going more towards EVs. Randy mentioned that. One of the things in the report was, you know, we just don't have enough base, just don't have enough base. When you get into EVs, how many more bays are you going to need? There's considerably all evidence that's out there. There's no oil changes. So every 5,000, 7,500 kilometers, it's not in for an oil change and everything else. All of those things. If we're looking, and the report kind of indicated that we didn't have enough bays, told us to go to more battery operated because they don't need as much maintenance. They don't need anything. Which side do I go here? Do we need to build the Flesherton Depot with more mechanical bays? Do we need to expand Chatsworth and then find out that we're going all to EVs and we only need one, really? Run it in, plug it in, put it into a computer and send it back out again 20 minutes later. A little facetious, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just say that at current, we are running beyond capacity of the 4 bays, mechanic bays that we do have. And the preventative and reactive maintenance applies not only just to the light duty half-ton stuff, which we are actually sending a lot to, you know, to local shops and that sort of thing, just because we would like to be doing more preventative maintenance and we don't have the time and mechanics to work on them. So we are farming a lot of that work out already and tend to be focusing on the more heavy equipment coming in the shops as well as ambulances and patient transfer vehicles from Bright Shores. So with all that extra work for, contracted services for EMS, falling behind on a preventative maintenance for tandem snow plows, having some contract agreements with Bright Shores, there is a need there in my mind to expand our team of mechanics and the facilities that they work out of. So.
And just to build on that, and this goes back to my earlier comments about being slow and methodical in terms of how we roll this out, and doing it with a handful of trucks initially, just to test to make sure it's going to work for us operationally, but also looking at on the heavy equipment side, as Sean indicated earlier, we're just not seeing the technology there yet. And so we have, as the one slide showed, quite a number of heavy equipment pieces in our fleet, and we anticipate having that in our fleet because again, we're not recommending to look at replacing any of those until there was a sufficient technology or alternative technology that would actually work for us operationally. So I think there's still a need for the bays and what you heard from Sean. Right now, we're actually at a shortage in terms of the number of bays that we have. We anticipate based on the deployment review on the paramedic side, we're adding more ambulances to the fleet in order to accommodate both growth projections as well as the call volume increases that we see each year. So that demand is just going to continue to increase, we see, for at least the foreseeable future. So we need to make sure that we plan accordingly and have enough infrastructure and bays to be able to support that fleet and do that more preventive maintenance as Sean indicated, so that we can see hopefully some longer term savings on the back end.
Shirley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to come back to chargers for a second. CAO Scherzer, as I read, they're talking about or recommending one charger per vehicle because we assume that most vehicles are doing their work during the day and charging overnight. So we almost have to calculate in the cost of a charger then per vehicle as well as a backup generator if power goes out. So I just didn't see a fulsome accounting of that calculation in the report because we're not likely to get grants enough to cover for that many chargers. So I just wondered if that calculation was being considered.
Yeah, I think through you, Chair. So that's again part of the strategy about being slow and methodical in terms of how we roll this out, so that we can start collecting some of that data and information to be able to say, okay, here's the number of chargers that we required to support X amount of fleet. What would we need in order to go beyond that? If it works for us operationally, what kind of chargers do we need in order to support more trucks being converted to alternative energy systems, right? So, and then, like you said, what is the infrastructure that's required to support those chargers? Do we have enough capacity at the building today? And if not, what are the costs in order to increase that capacity, not just to get the hydro to the building, but also the backup generator side of things. So that's something that we have some initial costs for in terms of what we need to support what's currently being planned. And we need to collect some of that data information to be able to put in cost out what that would be if we were to continue on that path, and then bring that back, obviously, for council's consideration as part of the overall capital budget and improvement budgets to our buildings and facilities. So that's something that we'll play it over time. And there's something that's with the manager of facilities and operations position that's supported by council in this year's budget. We're hoping that person will help support some of that work as well, to start to figure out a game plan to navigate some of that and to cost out what that looks like over the next 10 plus years, even in terms of those costs.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just one follow-up. So as we prepare to build Patrol D, are we factoring in, the hydro that will be needed and, yeah, and all the infrastructure for chargers? Yes.
Yep, that's a great question, because as Randy said there, it goes beyond, well beyond, and it's not lost on us at all that it goes well beyond the chargers and goes back to everything that comes from the road and essentially the line to make sure that you have adequate supply power in place there that you can plan for all these upgrades in the future. So our building condition assessments didn't really take that into account per se. So as these things come up in our planning for like Patrol D, for example, or replacements for panels and that sort of thing in the building and that are coming from the building condition assessments, we started to look at it and go, whoa, we got a lot of things that are going to be happening here in terms of the power in the next 15, 20 years. So we're not subject matter experts in that regard. So we've started working with an electrical consultant to say, these are all the things that we want to accomplish at these particular depots and bases in the next 15 to 20 years, as I said. We don't want to put something in now that we're just going to have to rip out and replace in 5 years. So what can we do now? And if we don't have the finances in place through the BCAs now, then can we start to build them in over the next 10 years so that we're not replacing things out of turn and then going back and reinventing the wheel all over again. So we actually just had a meeting with the consultant last week about that, and they're going to start some of the groundwork with us this week.
Oh, good. Yeah, you know what I'm going to say, Warren, so I won't say it. Another damn. A consultant, wonderful. Just as a little sidebar, you're talking about technology and whatnot. I have a nephew that works in the mines in Sudbury, heavy equipment mechanic. The mines in Sudbury are about 95% converted to electric there. And my biggest question is, where do you get the chargers? How do you get and they're 24-hour equipment. And he says, we just charge the batteries. That piece of equipment, we can't have it sitting. It can't be sitting waiting to get charged. So they just have another battery pack sitting there. He says it takes us less than a minute and a half to pull the battery pack out of the equipment, roll it over to the charger, roll the new battery pack in, whack, whack, and it's back into use again. So I don't know whether that's, is it that we need more, chargers for every piece of equipment, or you just need, another battery that, and that's what they're doing. That's how they're doing it in Sudbury at this point in time. But to your point, yeah, it's projecting what's it going to be, not today, but 5 years from now, that you put something in and it becomes totally redundant by that time. That's kind of like IT, because we just got to keep changing these things. And I can't even remember the password from the second last computer I had, laptop. But that's my little bugaboo about it for today. Anything else? Scott?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm glad, Randy, that you said slow and methodical, because there's a lot of questions, I think, that we don't have answers to. And before the county makes a huge financial commitment, I'm glad that we're going to learn. We always learn from mistakes. So I'm glad that we're taking this slow, because I think that's the way we need to go to make sure we get it right. So thanks.
As to a counterpoint, though, you could be taken and thinking of what we're losing by waiting so long as well, too. There's a lot of advantages out there. My electric car sitting out there. Yeah. Oh. Any other questions on this? I'm just going to say, I wish we could have got further down into as far as the budget goes. This is, it's great stuff as to what we have and you know, great orientation of how we're putting it together. But for a future meeting, really, we're not into much of the budget here. This is kind of some of the stuff and knowing, you know, where on a strategic, where we need to put, being able to make the best decision to put the money. You know, if we keep building within the city limits of Owen Sound and whatnot, we won't need many of these roads open out there, so we won't need as many snowplows. Anyways, that's another discussion further on down. Any other questions for Sean?
Pat?
No? Yeah. Getting off too easy. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. Trevor, what do you got for us? This will be a lot better. As far as delving right down into the good stuff. Sean's presentation was excellent. Randy, go ahead.
Just while Trevor is setting up and obviously we appreciate Transportation Services being the first to present us these capital presentations, and based on our previous discussion with Budget and Finance Committee, we want to try to at least provide the framework for how staff develop these 10-year capital plans and capital budgets. So hopefully we're providing that insight, but we're obviously looking for the feedback from the Budget and Finance Committee in terms of if there's any additional information that you're looking for future presentations, or if we need to bring some follow-up information back on Transportation Services. So we do appreciate Transportation Services being the first to go forward and to kind of set the stage a little bit. But if there is additional information or details that the Budget and Finance Committee is looking for, we're obviously open to that feedback. I will say that this is setting the stage for how these capital plans are being developed. There is plans to obviously bring back the capital overall proposed budget, updated budget, at a future Budget and Finance Committee meeting. So the plan, so to speak, is have information in terms of how we develop these budgets, and then of course bring back the actual capital updated budget following that. So hopefully it'll provide some good baseline information in terms of how we develop these, and then get into some of those details that I think you're looking for, Chair. But I just wanted to provide that context in terms of what we're hoping to achieve through these discussions, but again, looking for feedback in terms of how we might be able to provide any further information that you're looking for.
Good. You're up, Trev.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just preface by saying I know Sean referenced the trip from Wyerton to Dundalk, so this presentation's long. I'll try to keep it under a shorter trip than that, but we'll see what I can do. Basically this is just an overview of our 10-year capital process for roads, bridges, and stormwater infrastructure. Again, there'll be a kind of we'll go through basically what assets we're responsible for within Transportation Services, the different evaluation tools that we use, our funding sources, how we go about determining the budget for next year and the subsequent years within the plan, our project estimation and selection process, and then also a bit about asset management and how that affects the entire process. First, our county roads, typically we're responsible for asphalt, the shoulders, road base, our ditches, minor culverts, guide rail, traffic signals and signage. We also have some other infrastructure as well as some street lighting at different rural intersections, as well as different shares of retaining walls and some rural curb and gutter. In the urban areas, we also are responsible for the curb and gutter, but they're the sidewalks, sanitary, water main, and some or more of the street lighting for sidewalks and that are all part of the municipal infrastructure. So we also have our county bridges and structures. So we have 133 bridges and then 56 culverts in our inventory, and these would be all with a span of greater than 3 meters. These are mainly found on county roads, but we do have a number that are on boundary roads based on the bylaw from the early 1900s. Now, a proportion of these structures were built in the 1930s and 50s, so they're getting pretty far along in their service life. So of course, we're trying to address that at the later stages. And one of the ways we do that is we have an in-house bridge crew. So that bridge crew performs routine maintenance and minor rehabilitation work on some of our structures each year. What that does is extends the overall service life of those bridges and helps to keep them in a longer window for service, helping to save us some money overall. And we also have about 50 kilometers of storm sewer that we maintain. This comes along with catch basins, manholes, ditch inlets, and stormwater outlets that help us transport that water during rainfall events. So replacement of these storm sewer systems can be difficult as they're typically aligned with urban reconstruction projects. What that means is we need to work along with our member municipalities to make sure that the timing of our projects coincides with sanitary or water main replacement. So a lot of times you may end up sacrificing some life in your asphalt for the better need of some of the underground infrastructure. One element to keep in a point basically is that the storm sewers are rarely contained just to the county roads within an urban environment. Again, they form a bigger system. So part of the system will be on the county road, but again, it might outlet into a system that's part of the municipal municipal property. So what that means is we need to work in conjunction with one another to make sure that ongoing developments, make sure that the sizing is correct, make sure that our outlets are cleaned, our pipes are all serviced and cleaned as well regularly, and flushed to make sure that everything's working as it should. So how much is our assets worth? Based on our asset management plan, we have $1.36 billion worth of road infrastructure, 436 million in structures and 80 million in stormwater, which equates to about 188 million or $1 billion in total replacement value. So how do we evaluate what projects we have and what are our needs, priorities? So we'll go through some of the tools that we use to make some of those decisions. One of our main tools is our PCI information, which is our pavement condition index. And again, it's kind of like a grade you get in high school, where if you can get 100, it's in perfect condition and the best score you can get. And again, once it gets down to 50 and below, you start to get into failing grades and your assets need to be dealt with. The one thing about PCI is that different stages within the road's life, there's other treatments that can be done as well. So depending, you can do microsurfaces or grind and paves that, typically when a road's more sort of midlife, those treatments can help to extend the overall life of the asset. And from a cost perspective, they're much more affordable in the long run. So one of the tools we use, we have Iris City. So again, this is we have just over 500 road sections within the county. So each road section ends up getting a PCI, which is basically an average condition across that stretch of road. What Iris also provides us, as you can see on the right, is basically a PCI for every 10 meter segment of road. In the image there, you can see a bunch of green kind of on the right. That was a newly constructed road. And then on the left is basically a road that's probably 15 to 20 years old, where you can start to see the entire road is not necessarily in really poor condition, but just small pockets of it. And that's pretty typical when you start driving the roads. You'll notice kind of certain areas where the road's in much worse condition, and then there'll be maybe 100 meters of generally all right condition. And again, that's reliant on a number of different factors, whether that's drainage of the road, different cracking, different loading, different turning movements. And there's a large variety of factors that can influence that. So again, we look at different cracking patterns, which basically if we click on one of those individual points, what we see on the right is the imagery that was taken in that location. And what the software will end up doing is Looking at each type of cracking, it identifies the type of cracking it is, whether it's a alligator cracking or a transverse or center line, and then we can use that information to make judgment calls on the types of treatments that we would do. So again, we're looking at when we look at cracking, we're kind of identifying two different forms. There's what we call a top-down cracking, which is more they're basically treated by easier treatments like microsurface or route and seal, and that's basically to stop water from coming down into the asphalt. When we have bottom-up cracking, this is usually a result of subsurface issues. So there's either water in the granulars and it's causing basically a weaker subgrade, which then traffic hits that and starts to pound it down. So depending on the type of cracking we see, we have to analyze that and make different judgment calls on the types of treatments. Another factor we look at is road geometrics. So the first one on the left is the vertical curves. So when we're looking at vertical curves, when we have some sharp curves on our roadways, what that ends up happening is if there's a hazard on the road, you can kind of see a small raccoon there. A truck coming over top of the hill is not going to see that raccoon at time. So again, the stopping distance to be able to adjust to that and make a decision on what to do is reduced and puts that raccoon in danger. If we can make adjustments during our road construction to adjust those vertical profiles, we can increase the design or keep the design speed at a relatively safe speed for drivers, close to the posted speed. And what that allows us to do is make sure that if something does come onto the road and you need to make a decision and stop in time, you have that distance to make that maneuver. On the other side, we have the horizontal geometry, and this is, again, these are your standard curves in your roadway. There's two factors here. We need to make sure that our sight lines are still enable us to see those objects in the roadway. So again, that's keeping that inside of those curves clear so that we can maintain the sight distance required. And you can also see in that image, sort of like what you'd see on a NASCAR track, the road becomes banked in the corner. And that's really to make sure that the vehicles, as they go through a corner, forces will try to push them out off the road. And by banking that helps to keep the forces down in towards the pavement, keeps the friction on the road, and enables the cars to safely maneuver that turn. We also use traffic data. So again, we have a traffic counter on the left. They're just a little box that we put on a signpost, and they basically use radar frequency to detect different vehicles passing. And then on the right, we have turning movement counts. These are typically done at traffic intersections where we're looking at either signalization or turning movements, depending on future developments and what the impacts might be there. So one of the most important elements of traffic data is the percentage of heavy trucks. Ultimately, this is probably one of our biggest metrics that come out of traffic counts. And the reason for that is the types of heavy traffic greatly determine what the required structural capacity of the roadway is. So when we design roads, what we're typically looking at is the loading that's expressed in common terms as easels, which are equivalent single axle loads. And those equivalent single axle loads represent the number of vehicles that travel on that road and the weight proportionate to that vehicle. So each road will have, say, a couple 100 million easels as a sort of service life for the pavement. And as road cars continually drive across that, they wear down that life. So what we can see here, we have kind of a sports car at the bottom, which represents 0.0002 easels, whereas that transport truck is 2.39. So what that means from a loading perspective is a transport truck is equivalent to roughly 1,200 vehicles. So you can imagine most of our roads average between 1,000 and 4,000 vehicles per day. So just one of these trucks can easily equal 3 days worth of just regular traffic if you were to compare it. So that's where the percentage of heavy truck traffic really drives our designs. And what that means is we either increase the granular material under the road to provide more base, or we can address that through the use of geogrids or also multiple asphalt layers. So maybe instead of 2 lifts, you might do 3 or some thicker layers there as well. We also use our maintenance classification and road classifications to help us drive different types of treatments. and how they relate to our current levels of service. And risk plays a big factor in our decision-making process. And risk is really a calculation of the probability of failure multiplied by the consequence of a failure. So the probability is basically a measurement of how likely an asset is or could fail. So say a bridge that's 80 or 90 years old, it's very high or on the higher end of probability for failure, whereas a brand new structure is basically rare. So it should be on the low end of probability. And when we multiply that by the consequence of failure, the consequence represents all the different factors of that asset and what's its importance to the county or to the ratepayers. So for instance, if we had a road that was in close proximity to the hospital with 10,000 vehicles a day and a culvert blew out, that's obviously got a higher consequence than a sort of dead end road with 50 vehicles and a really short detour. So in terms of our OSIM inspections, these are for our bridges. So we do the OSIM inspections every 2 years on all of our structures, similar to likely what you get to in the municipalities as well. What the OSIM inspections provide us with is a list of different maintenance, rehabilitation, and reconstruction suggestions, and they basically frame it within a 10-year framework as well. And specifically with our consultant for this recent OSIM negotiation, what we've included is the ability for them to provide us with a 10-year capital plan that looks at our funding structure and also provides realistic attainable goals on how we can address our structures. They're also going to look at kind of what our funding needs need to be going forward, and then allow us to make some comparisons there and see whether we're on target or either ahead or falling behind. Then we also have our storm sewer CCTV inspections. So you can see on the left is basically a small camera on a little robot track. He'll drive forward and take different videos. Basically the camera can position and turn its head to look at different potential failures. So what it will typically do is a maintenance score and then a structural capacity score. So it'll tell you if there's a whole bunch of roots growing in there or rock debris in the pipe, we need to have that cleaned out, or there could be structural cracking that say there's hairline cracking on the top of the pipe that may ultimately lead to failure in the future. And then finally, our operations staff, every year they do our minor culvert inspections. We roughly have 1,600 culverts that are smaller than 3 meters in diameter, and our staff go around, run through the inspection module that we put together for them to take an idea of what the current condition is, and then staff both in operations and engineering utilize that information as part of our planning process. And then again, we mentioned before with the member municipality partnerships. Again, each year we work with our municipalities to look at what capital planning they have, specifically in terms of where it meets with ours in terms of county road infrastructure. And then again, we'll make adjustments each year depending on maybe funding levels from different municipalities, if we have to move forward or move back a project. Basically, those negotiations happen each year. So that's a quick summary of the evaluation tools that we use. So again, those just help us with a large number of the items identified, so we can just better predict capital costs. It helps us with construction timelines and also timelines for different treatments. Helps us to identify the project scopes and when those different treatments are best utilized. We can combine different projects. So one of those, for example, is Greater Road 9 this year, where we have a pulverize and pave and an overlay. We're combining multiple treatments into a project to help save some costs. This also helps us to verify design requirements. So maybe the road we have now is suitable for the traffic, or it may actually require some additional structure. It helps us to align with our asset management plan obligations. And then we also work with our public shareholders. So these would be the residents that live on those roads, having conversations with them. Maybe they have a drainage problem that we're not aware of that we can help address when we're out there. So So now we'll go into funding sources. So we have four major funding sources that we utilize as part of our planning process. The first one's obviously the levy, and that's the annual budget process, allocated through the annual budget process. And typically what we do in transportation is we will start with a 2% inflation on our capital plan. And then we also incorporate the 2.55 annual tax levy increase from the asset management plan. The second element is our development charges, and this is based on our development charges bylaw that was completed in 2021. So in there were a whole bunch of growth related projects that were identified. And then each of the project has a specific percentage. So, and that percentage represents the amount of new infrastructure that's being developed as part of that project. So I'll use a bridge again for an example. If we had a 2-lane bridge, but then the development charges identified that this needs to be a 4-lane bridge to deal with future requirements. What would happen is all the costs associated with those additional lanes and widening of that structure would be put into a percentage of the total cost, and then that percentage gets applied to whatever the final cost is of the project. And we generally have 6 different categories. So there are major road projects. We have upgrades to road classification. So that might be going from like a rural section to an urban section. We have platform widening projects, intersection improvements, which could be turning intersections to signalization or roundabouts, culvert replacements, and then also road studies like a transportation master plan, for example. We also have 2 annually recurring grants. So the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund and the Canadian Community Building Fund, which used to be gas tax. We typically get those 2 grants every year, and they do fluctuate. Whereas the other ones are kind of successful grant applications that we've had recently, which is like commuter cycling and also the infrastructure program, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. And that was used for the Prairie Road 3 and 4 roundabout. The other funding sources are reserves. So we have our Transportation General Reserve. We also have our Structures and Culvert Rehabilitation Reserve, which is typically used for all of our structure replacements. We have a Traffic Signals Reserve in our minor capital budget. That deals with any infrastructure requirements that we need for upgrading our signals. And we also have a land acquisition reserve, which is where we store money to pay for land acquisitions as we purchase them for road widenings or projects that require additional property. I've also noted a special project reserve. So we have a few of these within our reserves. One of them, for example, is a Grey Road 4 and 14 reserve, which was originally developed. Basically, it was for transporting windmill blades. And the additional loads that were resulted from those blades, we collected money in the county to help pay for the increased degradation to the road as a result of those heavy loads. I'll just go in to talk about the need for the structure reserve. So again, we identified this in the budget process in 2023. And really what it is we have what our bridge crew foreman likes to say is our like a bridge wave coming. But basically we have a number of bridge replacements that are going to be required in the next, say, 20 to 40 years, even 50 years. And really over the next 10 years, where our funding is at, typically a cost of a structure is around 2.3 million, depending on, this is kind of an average of our network. Of course, there are a lot of structures that are smaller and be a lot less, but then we also have a number of large span structures that can be in the $8 to $10 million range. So currently, we look based on our asset management plan and our OSIM inspections. We forecast that we need about 1.3 replacements per year over the next 10 years. And then the following 10 years, that jumps to almost 3, and then we get up almost to 5 a year. So what we're trying to do in terms of building our structure reserve, each year we increase the amount we're adding to that reserve by 250,000. So after 10 years, it should be roughly around 5 million that goes into that annually. So then whether that continues, it's really just to make sure that we're in a good place that we can afford to pay for these when that situation occurs. So how we determine our budget, we basically start from our previous year levy requirement. And this is where we had our 2% inflation increase, which appears to be about 210,000 for 2026. And then we also have our 2.55% asset management plan, annual tax levy increase, which I believe the budget's around 83 million for the county, so that would equate to about 2.1 million for 2026. And we use those numbers to get to our projected levy requirement. So we have other factors such as the OSIF and gas tax there, or CCBF. And again, those equate to about 6.8 million. And then we also have development charges that look to pay for the increase in or the change in our assets as we deal with future development. So in terms of estimating these project costs, what we do is we start within our 1 to 2 window. So these are projects that we have generally pretty solid designs on. We're either near tender or we're 90% stage with a lot of them. So we have a relatively good idea of the quantities, all the costs involved, and then we utilize pricing, unit pricing from the previous year contracts to help us develop cost estimates for those projects. So we tend to be pretty confident in terms of the 1 to 2 year window estimations. When we get into a 3 to 5 year window, this is where we start to look at basically standardized costs for a different type of treatment. So pulverize and pave maybe basically a certain price per kilometer. And then we will apply those standard cost rates to that project. And what we do is we'll also look at the project and identify different things that we could be doing. So like vertical and horizontal corrections, different sightline deficiencies, other treatments so there may be some dig outs or fill areas that help us, and we'll just make adjustments to those budgets based on what we kind of roughly estimate for those additional. And then finally, in the 6 to 10 year window, this is more or less strictly just a unit rate cost per kilometer application. And that's a large part because a lot of the jobs that get into that 6 and 10 year window, as we'll get to, there's a lot of potential fluctuation in the type of treatment that might ultimately occur with that road. And that's based on how fast it degrades, or maybe it lasts a lot longer. So you may have to make adjustments to those numbers as we move forward. So this chart here, basically the important element is on the left and shows the degradation of a road from a pavement condition of 100, and over its lifespan, you can see how it will naturally curve down and eventually gets down into kind of what we call the red zone, which is a major rehabilitation or reconstruction. And ultimately what we'd like to do from an asset management perspective is try to do treatments within the upper areas. So as you can see, some of those areas, when we get into that top green area, which is preservation, so crack sealing and microsurfacing, a lot of those happen within 5 to 10 year range of a brand new road. So what can happen is you'll see potentially in the 10-year capital plan, I know there's a few instances of this where there's a capital project, but then also about 5 to 7 years out, you might see a microsurfacing project on the same road, which can be alarming to some because you think, well, we just did some work on that road. Again, these kind of help to prolong those assets and is ultimately kind of a best practice if you can manage it. So again, that depends on your funding levels. You're trying to ultimately get away from worst first, and these sort of decisions help to get us there. So again, as said, you want to keep your good roads good. So that's ultimately what we're striving for. And then this, not that you'll need to really, this is up there more or less just as a basically what we go through as engineers and designers. When we look at each road treatment, we have to look at the types of cracking, all of the different, whether it's top down, bottom up, the current condition, where the condition might be projected in a few years. All of those things go into our decision making. So if we look at a single road section, basically any of these sort of treatments could potentially be viable. And we've got to look at each one and see, all right, does this make sense? Is this the best approach? Are we better to wait 5 years and address it through this process here? And now, considering we have over 500 road sections, you can start to picture how much actual potential outcomes there are. So there's basically a large number of combinations that could occur. So currently, we have our 10-year capital spreadsheet that we designed in-house. And basically this helps us as we move jobs in and out of different years, we can basically dynamically see the changes into the funding levels. So where we'll utilize this, if I maybe say I'm gonna move a pulverize and pave 2 years back, I'll just make that adjustment and I can immediately see the financial impact, move another job in to fill its place and make those adjustments. So yeah, it's basically, as you see, like there's billions of possible iterations for how we could potentially build out these 10-year plans, and there is no perfect 10-year plan, as much as I'd like there to be. I know I don't have the brain capacity to be able to run that many iterations of the plan, so ultimately what we're trying to do as we improve and get better is starting to utilize software. So in this case, we've been working with IDS, which is their asset optimizer software, to basically allow us to run this thousands and thousands and millions of combinations to look at what is best suited for the county. So we can adjust funding models, we can adjust levels of service, make all of those different processes within the software, identify it or attach it to risk levels, and make sure that the software's looking at each individual road section, determining which one makes the most sense, and then doing all those calculations in the background, saving us an ample amount of time. So yeah, we're continually working on that. We've got basically an agreement with the staff at IDS, and we're moving forward with developing all that as we speak. Again, within that software as well, it's all tied to our GIS as well. So anytime we make adjustments to the data, it's all fed through and automatically adjusts our plans. So it's basically dynamic. As soon as if we get new PCI information, we can immediately upload it and see what the impacts are to our plan long-term because of those changes. So finally, just some general risks that always play a part in our decision-making. Again, weather and climate change, ultimately making adjustments to how we design different infrastructure, storm related. So culverts, are they sized properly? Can they deal with flooding levels that we see? The rate of deterioration of assets, again, that changes with every single road. So some will obviously get worse, maybe quicker than others, and some might get worse and then they kind of level out and you all of a sudden realize, okay, well, it seems to have stabilized and it's not as bad. We have environmental assessments that can make some different adjustments to how we deal with projects, whether that's adding or adjusting scopes depending on public needs. We have municipal partnerships, again, how those impact plan, whether they change timelines or even staff turnover is another one. So again, as people come and go, the decision-making that was done by others may not be the same decision-making by the new staff. And then we also have some finance-related ones. So there's obviously budget impacts to the whole county and how those impact us. If the ability to follow the asset management plan recommendations. So there may be some years where we just have too many pressures and we aren't able to achieve that 2.55, and we may have to make adjustments and understand those risks. Development charges is an ongoing risk, and how the province potentially may change that process. And then grant funding. So OSIP is an example, it can fluctuate up to 15% per year. So we have to be cognizant of that as we move forward. So yeah, that's generally it. I wonder if there's any questions.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And thanks, Trevor, for your presentation. I did have a question. I'm wondering if the county is considering alternate types of road and bridge construction. We just built 2 double lane 20-foot bridges in Meaford, both of them under $1 million for the 2 of them combined. I'm wondering if you're looking at any recycled pavement. Reclamite seems to be holding up really well on Storybook Park Road. So I'm just wondering if the county's exploring any of those opportunities that might reduce costs for our 10-year capital.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So when we look at bridges, a lot of the situation we get into, because they are county roads, and we're speaking strictly to the county road structures. Typically, a lot of the, we'll say, all new alternatives tend to be better suited to more toward local and small traffic volume roads. They just don't tend to have the same projected longevity and loading requirements that you would find in a more standard bridge. Now, some of our more local roads, the ones that we have on boundary roads with lower traffic, there's always, anytime we go into one of those, there's discussions with the consultant to see potentially what types of treatments might work in that situation. So each project, we're looking at the best ways to find the best value for our money. It really ultimately comes to what the requirements are for the road network and where that structure is. Yeah. And then in terms of asphalt, again, being a county road, a lot of times the required structure requires more depth of the asphalt. So some of those other treatments, we do look at them. We do have RAP, which is recycled asphalt that goes into our base layers. We have a certain percentage that we're willing to accept. We do find that in our top course asphalt, we prefer basically a pure AC. And we try to avoid RAP in the top course, but there continue to be pressures more from kind of the urban centers where they do have huge amounts of RAP material to try to increase those percentages. We also, look at basically within our pulverize and pave, a lot of times we're crushing the existing asphalt and reusing it in the road base. So again, it still has some hardening elements to it and provides a little bit of a pseudo asphalt surface underneath the asphalt that goes over top. Again, obviously looking at whatever ways we can recycle what we have is the process that we try to follow. So.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Craig. We use a lot of programs and consultants to come up with our decisions. Is there a room for the human element in there for the experience that we have in the field for people to say, well, I know this is what the calculation says, but that road's in better condition than we really think it is. And secondly, where does technology come in there? At the Good Roads Conference, there was a presentation on resurfacing, and they were saying that Ontario, in their opinion, wasn't using the most advanced systems right now. And there's Western provinces seem to be a little ahead of the curve, I guess you'd say, on that one. So where do those things fit into this calculation?
In terms of, talk to the, I guess, the second one. In terms of the types of different treatments, we do have issues where locally we have certain asphalt providers. They are restricted to what they can provide as well, and whether they're changing their types of materials. We can start to spec other stuff, but what typically will happen when you don't have providers in the area, you'll see a much higher cost to that. So there are different treatments, again, that other provinces are testing. We've seen different stuff out of the UK that also like some self-healing pavements that recently have been researched as well, which is utilizing like basically vegetable oil to help reseal cracking within the asphalt and help prolong its life. Some of those treatments are out there, and again, it's really just trying to get it here where it becomes viable for us from a cost perspective. And sorry, the first question was, the human side. So the human side basically is part of all of our decision making. So even when we talk about when we get the PCI data, we still have staff go out every year, drive those roads, take a look. Does this make sense? There really is no way to get away from the human feel. And maybe I didn't do a great job of describing how much of that we actually do. But really it is a lot of just us getting out there, viewing the roads, looking at what the data is telling us, and then using that as well as our visual and our judgment calls to make decisions that way. Where we do struggle internally is more on, say, the structures side of things. We don't, other than some kind of simple culvert replacements, we don't have a huge background in types of structural design that we could really provide much value beyond what the consultants. So we more or less have to rely on their expertise in those elements. But yeah, we're not.
Recently we did a relining of a storm sewer in Hanover, and do you take and have those options available? And if you're working in an urban county road, are you taking that back to the municipality and saying, have you considered this if the road surface is actually in decent shape?
We haven't really come across that situation just yet in some of the urban environments. We are doing a fold and form, which is basically a culvert liner RFP that's actually going out relatively soon for some of our really deep culvert replacements. So again, these are culverts that would be 5 or 6 meters down. Like financially to dig that out, you major road closures and a lot of material moving. So what we're doing is looking at basically lining those to help get increased service life out of those. We do have different projects where, and one of them actually is in the town of Markdale currently, where we will be potentially looking at maybe a lining treatment. We have storm sewer that's part of a urban reconstruction project where the water main and sanitary need to be addressed, but the storm sewer is kind of like halfway through its life. So whether we can look at doing some sort of treatment like a liner that may extend it to try to align those better, that's one option that we have. But it typically, by the time we get into most of those urban environments, either the storm sewer is way undersized at that point, so you need to reconstruct it new anyway, or it's just in too poor condition that it's the same result. So.
Well, my comments are going to be kind of a summarization of the report rather than anything particularly direct, and they're somewhat building off of the vice chair's comments and a little bit of what I think Randy was alluding to earlier in terms of listening for feedback. In front of me right now is page 1086 of the 25 to 34 transportation services summary. And in 2024, the approved budget net levy requirements was 11.6 million, up to 14.2 million, up to 14.3 million, 16.9, et cetera, 2032, 29.6, 2033, 40.2. It seems to me that there's somewhat of an assertion that just comes through that everything can be always funded just by the taxpayer. And when I see what's essentially more than a doubling of the net levy requirements in 10 years, I have an appetite to dig much deeper in terms of all the projects that are within this, because I don't find that acceptable to be able to have that type of an increase over 10 years. I get it. Everyone's got the same story where our assets are old and et cetera, but this is not a pace that is sustainable to be able to apply to the general public at large. Yes, some people have incomes that you move the needle like that, and they have income increases that they really don't notice it. But there's a huge segment of the population that cannot sustain that type of increase. And this is just one department. So coming into today, when we're talking capital, I was ready to speak to, a number of items that might be from page 1086 to page 1565 in our 10-year capital plan. I'm not sure my peers are ready for that, but I think that's some of my expectation that we as a committee here should be doing. I think, not to hit on the role of standing committees again, but that's a strength of the standing committees. If there's a standing committee for transportation, you are going to go through these projects and have a much more informed discussion on how we can mitigate this escalation of the net levy requirement, because something has to be done, and it has to be beyond what we gather here today in this report. Like, this is great. You've explained both operationally and the 10-year capital of how you calculate and the PCI and forms, et cetera. But I'm going to pick on Grey Road 17. And we have a grant request in for a pedestrian trail and basically to urbanize a rural settlement, a rural cross section of road. And I'll go to those 4 or 5 homes that purchased houses in a rural setting and have an expectation then for an urban standard to be applied. And I'll say, you build here. And here's my reference point in what we cannot afford at the county, that we shouldn't be moving forward with projects like that. Or the only way it's acceptable is we have a much more fulsome discussion of the projects, either at this committee. I think it has to be this committee. That seems to be the framework we've decided. It has to occur somewhere, because right now it's not occurring. In the last 2 or 3 years, I think it's north of $10 million on Gray Road 9 across different projects. And I think it's next year's 3.5 million for a 1 kilometer stretch in downtown Dundalk. And certainly it's needed, but that's not water and wastewater. So I'm not thinking, holy cow, what does this project consist of? Like, once you throw the water wastewater on, it's a massive cost for that downtown project. So I just wonder, like, what I'm looking for is we need the ability, or we should have the appetite to have more discussion about trying to bring these projected dollar increases down, because that's not sustainable and we're not yet ready today to have it. So my appetite and desire would be, we have a process in place that we return like 1 to 3 year capital items, because they're all itemized. You've got it in the 10-year capital plan, it's there. And we can have a more informed discussion about items that are within it. I know at the city, we have an acute understanding of our 5-year plan, and it's broken down in terms of what's funded and what's not funded. And it's always changing. There's projects will move out of the funded and slip into unfunded, and vice versa. Hopefully we can see something like that in the future of this committee, because I think we need to. That's just working off of essentially what was an appendix to last year's budget. So some could say, well, you passed it. Well, I guess technically we passed it. It was an appendix, but we don't have the arena yet to have the discussion about items that are in there. So I think that's what's certainly necessary. And it's not just this department, it's going to be necessary with every department, so we can be more informed, because we don't have a process yet that does inform council to make the decision. So that's my summation, I guess, or summation.
And you're correct. I didn't hear an answer or question in that, but Mary Lou, do you want to comment?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Some of what Councillor Gregg has said harkens back to the days of the old standing committees. So Transportation and Public Safety would meet and talk about the 10-year capital plan. And staff would be given a direction, and committee would make some suggestions on how it would be adjusted. And back in the day, it was a 5-year plan, not 10. So we've come a long ways. What I see this doing is helping to inform when we move into the budget process in the fall and going through the 10-year capital exactly how we've discussed here today, and having an opportunity for departments to go through and explain those budgets. So when we went to the Budget and Finance Committee and asked for feedback, when I look at the minutes, so Kim emphasized the commitment to maintaining service quality, acknowledged the unforeseen events may necessitate adjustments to project timelines, which happens when we're dealing with, the case of transportation, our partners, or it might be a road deteriorates faster than we anticipated. She indicated staff were looking to maintain levels of service while maximizing investments. So, we've had the comment here before with doing more with less, where like you spend the money as if it was your own personal money. How do I in long-term care just because a dryer is at the end of its life cycle, but it's still working perfectly fine. We don't throw it out. We're going to use it for another year or two and then come back to you and say, well, okay, now's the time to replace it. We're also looking for consistent principles to best plan and present budgets for committee. So some of the members indicated they acknowledged it could be difficult to really have concrete numbers beyond a 5-year timeline. And I think that was you, Councillor Greg. And it is true, you know, that they've got designs done, as Trevor said, for years 1 and 2, which is admirable because years ago, we'd be sitting here right now without having designs done for year 1. So that gives them a better opportunity for budgeting. And then, yes, as Trevor said, you know, you're using some cost per kilometer for the ones that are further out. And then it was the understanding of the decision-making process that people were looking for that would help support more informed discussions and spending justifications. So really, that's the purpose of what we're doing now, to help give you that, I'd say, foundation for the meetings that we have to go over 10-year capital. And then the piece I'd like to talk about at some point is in our timelines, do you want to go back to seeing the 10-year capital separate from the annual budget process? Because otherwise we need to schedule a lot more days. And so that's where I'd like your feedback.
Well, I think we need more time. I still would abide by my sentiments earlier that I think 5 to 10 years is a little bit of throwing darts. You have an idea, but it's a long way down there, and priorities are always changing depending upon a number of factors. But this can help inform more discussion for like the 1 to 3 year horizon. But I think we need to have more discussion for that 1 to 3 year horizon so that we have an enhanced idea of the scope and so forth of projects. Because right now it's pretty broad in terms of what we are just looking to approve, I think, in that capital plan. And again, it's not just this department, it would be any department. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. If I can, Councillor Greg, I'm trying to assess whether or not your comments have to do with service level or purely more the timing of projects and the analyzing of, similar to the conversation already about like the trucks. Okay, is a road deterioration level, at what point, at what PCI does this council give direction to staff to say, okay, at this level of PCI, that's when we're going to pull the trigger to say, this is when the project gets done. And I don't know if, from the way you're saying is it that service level change where Grey County Council is going to give direction to staff to say, we're comfortable with a lower service level on our roads, a lower quality of roads, so that we are not seeing such an increase levy-wise and projecting out further. When I look at that, I fear that there becomes a time when the catch-up day hits, and then 5, 10 years from now, or sorry, I will rephrase that because of the scope we're talking about, probably 15 years from now, you see that catch-up year where suddenly multiple roads are deteriorating faster than expected because they've hit end of life, and then you have a catch-up. And I think what staff are presenting in the 10-year, from my understanding, is a culmination of all the policies that have been put in place over the last number of years, the types of studies that have been done to inform that data. What I'm understanding from you, and I'm looking for you to correct me if I'm misinterpreting you, is when or where do we have that conversation as a committee or as a council as a whole on that service level? Projects you've mentioned before in the past, projects come off as a one-off, and then it becomes difficult for the council as a whole to understand the implications of that service level change on this particular project in terms of how it affects the scope. And then does that service level change here indicate or suggest that we're going to do the similar service level changes somewhere else? So is that kind of what you're talking about? Like, how do we have that service level change Or is your concept more, do we give direction on what level of numbers we're looking for to implement a road improvement?
Well, I think service levels may be twofold. One is the annual ongoing operational service level. So it could be at what point you send your plows out and how you treat your roads with how much precipitation, snow, whatever, your ratio mix. There's an operational service level, independent of capital requirements. Service level upon capital requirements, you are always going to put the monies aside to replace what you have. But I guess I'll refer to a project that's going to somewhat fall off the books with the urban roads download. So there was a book, a value of approximately $10 million for 8th Street in Owen Sound, Gray Road 5, for a couple different segments. It wasn't $10 million exact, but I think it's pretty approximate. It was about $10 million to 20th Avenue intersection at the eastern boundary. As a committee, you might be willing to sit there and say, that's a lot of money. What is it we are building? And should we be having a discussion about, is this got enhancements that we should be taking a closer look at that are over and above service level? Service level is the road as it exists now and future requirements. But to what scale are we building? What is $10 million purchasing you? That's a little bit more of what I'm talking about here is, are there some extras? Are there some components in some of the capital projects that we should be applying a different, a deeper set of eyes on? So I hope that responds well to the questions you had.
Anybody else? Mary Lou, please. Oh,
The one piece I was going to add is you see a large increase in this budget because it is a large budget. And that's where the 2.55% asset management and transfer to reserve exists. And Councillor Nielsen, you raised some good questions. And it's an imprecise science. Councillor Eccles has said this over the years as well, that, you know, should we be putting away money to replace things and the taxpayer of the day pays for it, or should the taxpayer of that day pay for it? And there's no right or wrong answer, aside from there needs to be a balance, because you can't just borrow everything, and we can't just sit on money that we'll use in 40 years. And, you know, what would the impact of the potential, like for the road exchange be? We don't have designs on those potential roads. Some very, very rough estimates. And, you know, you're all right. This is something you don't take lightly, and we're trying to figure out, you know, how much money do we need basically to keep things well managed so that you're not building the Cadillac, but you're not sitting here with the Ford Pinto either. There needs to be a balance. And that's what really as staff we're trying to achieve here. You know, not trying to come up with a level of service that is unattainable. And I'll say that, you know, has to be a part of our next asset management plan. And we're a little behind in that because, well, our asset management coordinator had a baby a month ago. So you're going to see a report back here shortly on level of service and what that's going to look like. And that'll be something that's refined over time. It's not a set in stone. Our opinions will change over time, but it'll be based on the best information that we can share at the time and look for your feedback.
okay. Very good. And I think that's what we're trying to get at. We could just paraphrase from Councillor Gregg. Doubling over the next 10 years is not Not something that I want to stomach anyways. And probably the rest of the taxpayers don't want to stomach as well either. If that's the overall budget is going to double between now and the next 10 years. And that's, oh, geez, this committee's down to 5 people now here today. But we've got, take that and be able to supply the funding. And I think it's more towards what you're saying, Mary Lou, is strategically, how can we continue to do that? Is there a way to go? I'm not certain, I've said it for a couple of years, I'm not certain that, putting asphalt down is the answer. In 10 years' time, and I'll use the example, the Ukraine-Russian war right now. It's not being fought by airplanes. It's not being fought by tanks. It's being fought by drones. How much in the cities right now in North America, there's a number of drones that are doing deliveries. So to the point of the asphalt index, are we going to have, how many more of these trucks are we going to have on the road? Is it 10 years? I mean, 10 years ago, if you would have told me that there was going to be 1,500 people expansion in the town of Dundalk, I'm not sure I would have laughed at you or just walked away, but it's happening. They've got the highest point in South. Yeah, they've got a infrastructure piece there that's higher than the CN Tower, for God's sake. So they tell us. This, I think, is a lot of maintaining what we are. And I'm struggling. Yeah, we'll need information. Certainly, Councillor Gregg, Councillor Keaveney, to get to that. Where are we going? And I think that's my understanding. That's what this committee is here for, to try and drive down into some of those operational, advantages or strategic where we're going as a county, or maybe even as a community. But thank you. You capture all of that? Oh, Rob's captured it. It's all on tape. Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. Councillor Keaveney, Shirley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll look forward to further confirmation or conversation and information about that. I need to think about what Councillor Gregg has said. Randy, I wanted to come back to your comment before Trevor spoke, if I may, when you very generously offered to provide more information to this committee. And coming back to the 2022 report that recommends that the county continue to purchase its vehicles, I just wonder if that is still the best course of action now in 2025, 2026. Thinking in particular of our pickup and light duty fleet, recognizing that we feel in Meaford that we've been very successful financially with leasing. We've been with Enterprise for a number of years now. I'm going to say off the top of my head, maybe 8 years. And so I just wondered if you'd give consideration to maybe, having a discussion with our staff or just having a second look at leasing opportunities, just to confirm that that's not an option that the county wants to consider, and that you still want to go ahead and purchase those particular vehicles.
Yeah, you can hear that. I can speak to that briefly. Yeah, we had a meeting recently we met with Enterprise quite a few years ago. And it kind of, the way it worked out then, it kind of didn't fit kind of our business model. But we had a meeting set with them about a month ago, but it ended up getting canceled because something else came up. But we are going to meet with them again. In general, it seems like, there's a government rebate on vehicles. They really see their business model seems to be benefiting from receiving the government rebate, which went away for a while during COVID, right? Benefiting the government rebate and selling basically was kind of how they're kind of winning with the government rebate. And really, in that way, when I look at it, I say, well, if they're winning with the government rebate, why aren't we just winning with the government rebate? Why would we let someone else sell a vehicle? Why would we just sell our vehicles themselves? So it's a financial exercise. But anyway, we will meet with Enterprise again and just see, because we've heard good and bad. Like we've heard some people are not happy with service, some people are very happy. So we need to do a little more research on our end. We do have a lot more, we don't farm out the work to shops probably as much as other departments or counties would. So there is that, but yeah, we will look into that again and try to meet with them again. We just haven't been able to connect.
Thank you for that question. I think that's just a great example of staff are always looking for those opportunities to look to see if we can do things differently, whether it's to reduce costs, either upfront, reduce costs over a period of time. We're still looking for those opportunities. And as Pat indicated, based on the example just provided, we're always looking to see if does it make sense. So we're always looking at things from a business case perspective, costing that out to determine whether or not that does make sense or not. And of course, we're happy to have those further discussions with council in terms of bringing those business cases forward where it makes sense. If there's a change that we see that, yeah, there's merit to explore that, we'll of course bring that forward to council for further discussion, as well as through the budget process in terms of recommendations that we put in place. So as Pat indicated, on that particular example, we'll investigate further and see if there's merit in terms of exploring that. And if it means that, like Pat said, if there's still opportunities that we still own our own fleet, but can take advantage of some other rebates that currently maybe didn't exist previously but may exist now, again, we're always looking for those opportunities. Back to what I was hearing in terms of Councillor Gregg and through the discussion with the committee, I think I was hearing levels of service, and as Mary Lou indicated, we're bringing forward that report on levels of service based on the requirements as it relates to the asset management plan. So we'll hopefully have some of that discussion with the Budget and Finance Committee in the very near future. The other part of it is what I'm hearing is that digging into a little bit further in terms of the capital, at least with that 1 to 3 year time frame on some of the projects, and looking for, what is maintaining level of service in terms of replacing what we've got, versus if there's any items within those projects where it's maybe an enhanced level of service and how we're funding that. Because what you heard in some of the presentation, if there is an enhanced level of service that's attributed to growth, then we're looking at development charges usually to help fund and support that. So though it may be a bigger dollar figure in terms of overall project, how we break down the funding for that project, whether it be through funding it through development charges or through some of the grants we receive, that's something that we can unpack a little bit further, at least for conversations with the Budget and Finance Committee. But so what I'm hearing is that we may need at least another meeting or more. So that's something we can work with Mary Lou and her team, all the departments and obviously clerks to figure out if we need some additional dates on the budget side of things, just to dig into that capital a little bit further, especially as it relates to the 1 to 3 year projects. But again, if I don't have that correct, let me know. And if there's any other further information or feedback that this committee is looking for, we're happy to do that and help support that.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Just back to your comment about leasing. And Sean, it was in your report, wasn't it, that the consultant had said, was it 12 years on the trucks? I just forget.
Yeah, so they mentioned that a potential might be advantageous to rent trucks with higher than average mileage. So that would specifically pertain to like our patrol trucks that do quite a bit of driving around. And I would just add to what Pat said as well. We have had a little bit of discussion with some of the municipalities that have gone with like a rental model, and there are good aspects as well as some concerns from their operations folks, not specifically me or anything like that. Just around like the suiting for what you get is a base truck, and then you gotta suit it for a work truck, and then if you only have that in the fleet for a few years, then you gotta. So there is some logistics there in terms of turning trucks over. As well as it's a typical subscription model, so you get base pricing and then there's plus for, additional mileage and that sort of thing. So we haven't done full return on investment or economic breakdown, but it's just a consideration that I wanted to throw out there as well.
Okay. Any other questions for Trevor? That was more all for information. It is getting on in the day. You told us we wouldn't get, well, I think you got from Wyerton to Proton Station. You may not have got quite to Dundalk, but you come darn close there, bud. Okay. There is one other item here. 4B, the external audit. BDO, oh no, it's not BDO, it's MNP, that report. Garrett?
Thank you. And yeah, usually this report would come earlier as it's a planning report and our audit fieldwork's already done. But with the transition from BDO to MNP and the timing of us going out to tender to appoint our auditors, the timeline didn't quite work out where we couldn't get an engagement letter signed because we couldn't pass a bylaw, because BDO was the successful bidder on our tender, but then BDO was no longer in Owen Sound. So there was some logistics work out there, and that's why you're getting a planning report after our auditors have already come and gone. So I'll be quick. Basically, this is just summarizing the report that we get from BDO, basically appointing or discussing what an audit is. At last Budget and Finance, Mary Lou gave a very good impromptu overview of what auditors do, why they're needed, and what their testing is involved. And this report just kind of provides a bit more detail. Also provides why we are required under the Municipal Act to have an audit done, and then goes into some specific risks associated with the county or municipalities as a whole that they identify, and then testing that they do to mitigate those risks. And I will leave it at that if there's any questions.
No questions, but I'll move the recommendation for you.
Seconder. Shirley, beat you to it, Warren. Any further discussion on the motion to appoint the auditors? And I guess that's do we have the right to do that, or is it got to go to council? This is just the receiving the information letter. Okay, thank you. Yep. All right. No other questions? All those in favor? Carried. All right. Thank you, Garrett. You are not in planning. This is near the end and you were very quick. Maybe you should talk to Scott Taylor, who sits over there at some point in time. We'll leave it at that. Correspondence. None that we're aware of. Nope. And other business? Nope. Oh, Mary Lou, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to mention, so for the June meeting, we hope to have the presentation of the audited financial statements by MNP. We also hope to have a number of reports, some which I would say are, if we had a consent agenda, would be consent. A lot go with the annual financial statements, such as a lease financing report, which is a requirement of the province that we disclose to you any leases we have back in the old, I think it was M&Q inquiry days. Some presentation on development charges, what we collected for last year, investments, as well as giving you some first quarter information. And that meeting also includes presentations similar to what you've seen by transportation today, who set the bar pretty high. It'll be from planning, paramedic services, and IT. Just to give you an idea of what's forthcoming.
Okay, that will be good. And that next meeting is June 25. Okay. That's it. Adjournment. I don't even need that. Procedurally, we've completed everything on the agenda. I declare the meeting adjourned. Yeah.